Welcome back. You're watching the SABC News channel. Now we return to Geneva where we take live pictures of the special session that's taking place right now, looking into the killings of Palestinians on Monday.
This council has reached a new height of hypocrisy and the lowest standards of credibility. Unfortunately, the automatic anti-Israel majority of this council will once again prevail, and the resolution before you will be adopted. But this won't change anything on the ground. Israel will continue to defend its citizens while respecting its international commitments. And as long as this council maintains its discriminatory attitude towards Israel, none of its resolutions will ever be taken seriously. We simply do not have the luxury to trust a body for the rights of the Israelis. Less, but being torn apart.
Thank you very much, Excellency, for your statement. And now I'll pass the floor to the distinguished representative of the State of Palestine. You have the floor, sir.
Shukran, Zeid Ra'ad.
Thank you, Mr. President. Once again, I would like to express my thanks to all the states that made interventions in the first part of this special session, as well as civil society organizations. Following some of the interventions now and this morning, I have the impression that it's Palestine that occupies Israel. Is this to continue? It's a farce. And I address these words to the representative of the occupying power and the blind support. 50 years. Screens Palestinians being killed with the pretext used that we are defending ourselves. It is Israel that attacked Tunisia, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq. It is Israel that was the aggressor in the latest criminal acts in Malaysia. It attacks all sorts of places, claiming it's defending itself. It's self-defense. Peaceful demonstration, Mr. President, as we heard today, is an absolute right. What happened on the 30th of March and until today, our demonstrators in various areas of Palestine are demonstrating. This is an absolute right. It is a form of peaceful expression. It is a right that is guaranteed. The deliberate killing to the Rome Institute. There are attempts to distort facts. Let us suppose that is true. Let us set up an independent international commission of inquiry to be mandated by the Council to go and bring the facts to us, to check and verify the false claims of the Israeli side, claims that have been perpetrated from the very beginning. But the current Israeli leadership is trying to control the world under the pretext that we are threatened, we will be killed, and so on and so forth. Of the National Council in 1988 have announced that we want peace. And the world agrees with us that the peace is based on a two-state solution. That is, the occupation that started in '67 should be put to an end, and that our people should exercise their right to self-determination with a state that is independent and with East Jerusalem as its capital. But Israel refuses that so far. And the current Israeli government, as said by the Prime Minister and the President and a number of leaders, they announced in more than one occasion that the Palestinians should forget the illusion that they have that they may one day have a state. What do you expect from us? to go out and demonstrate with joy over your occupation, your killings, your crimes against us. Some continue to say, unfortunately, that we, Israel, share common values. What values? Of blockades, of stealing and usurping natural resources, attacking children, animals, disabled people. These are the values that they're talking about. These are the values of the so-called only democracy in the Middle East. What democracy are you talking about? I feel sorry for you. I feel sorry for the current leadership of the U.S. for its blind support for this approach that will destroy the legality that we have all agreed on, that threaten international peace and security. Wake up! There should be clarity in the international position with regard to this issue. Mr. President, law is not negotiable. Law must, national humanitarian law is a set of imperative rules that must be implemented. I repeat, Palestinians are ready to if there are any allegations that we did not behave appropriately. We are ready to subject ourselves to investigation, but we have no trust in Israeli investigations because there have been so many incidents since the incident of 1993 where an Israeli extremist killed so many Palestinians, and his burial, where he is buried, has become a site of pilgrimage for Israelis. He killed 55 people, and then they say that he was in a state of psychological disturbance. Is it possible that all Israelis have psychological problems? Then we should help them, perhaps, so that they get over to the occupation. To countries that will vote for this resolution, to countries that will abstain, and countries who vote may go against consensus, and countries may have a moral dilemma, but they should hasten to find a solution. I thank you for your understanding. Of course, I don't want to ask Israel to cooperate with this commission because I think the Israeli position is clear. Israel refuses to cooperate with any UN mechanisms, not just Human Rights Council mechanisms, in any field whatsoever. Israel considers itself above the law and wants to stay above the law. My recommendation is try to be a bit more modest and be a normal part of this global community. As you have heard today, except for one voice was clear. Only one voice supported Israel. So the problem is not with the just one or two. Thank you.
For your statement. And now, guys, for this draft proposal. And I'll pass the floor to Mr. Kyle Ward, Chief of the Program Support and Services of HR, for a statement. Mr. Ward, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The draft resolution now before the Council, as orally revised, decides to urgently dispatch an independent international commission of inquiry to be appointed by the President of the Human Rights Council to investigate all alleged violations and abuses of international humanitarian and human rights law in the occupied Palestinian territory, particularly in the Gaza Strip, in the context of large-scale civilian protests that began on 30 March 2018. The Commission of Inquiry is requested to provide an oral update to the Council at its 39th session and present a final written report to the 40th session of the Council in March 2019. Owing to the brief duration of this session and the recent presentation of the draft resolution and these oral revisions, the Secretariat has not benefited from the requisite period to prepare and present a formal statement of financial implications to advise the Council. The Secretariat is currently finalizing its analysis of the detailed requirements and the related costs, which will be brought to the immediate attention of the General Assembly to request an urgent allocation of resources to implement this mandate, if adopted. This statement is presented to inform the Council that no provision has been included within the approved program budget for the biennium 2018-2019 to accommodate these new activities. The additional requirements for the implementation of this draft resolution, if adopted, will be accordingly presented to the General Assembly in the context of the next annual report of the Secretary General on the revised estimates resulting from resolutions and decisions adopted by the Human Rights Council this year.
For your statement, and now members of the Council who wish to make explanations of votes before the vote, as orally revised. I recognize Belgium.
Thank you, Mr. President. I deliver this explanation of vote on behalf of Spain, Slovenia and my own country. Our countries consider the convening of this special session as most timely and appropriate. We are appalled by the excessive and disproportionate use of force by the Israeli authorities, causing dozens of deaths and thousands of injured, while there was no Spain, Slovenia and Belgium therefore support the request to establish an international and independent investigation. We appreciate the efforts of the State of Palestine to come to a more balanced text and welcome the oral amendments introducing a call on all parties to ensure that future demonstrations remain peaceful and to abstain from actions that could endanger the lives of civilians. Hamas and those leading the protests in Gaza have a responsibility to avoid provocations and to ensure that they remain strictly non-violent. We would have preferred that the resolution also include a reference to the legitimate right of Israel to defend itself however, cannot be reason enough not to vote perpetrators of human rights violations should be held accountable. Accountability is a key principle to reach the path of dialogue and sustainable peace. Spain, Slovenia and Belgium will therefore vote yes on the resolution, and we call upon all member states to vote yes as well. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Excellency. I pass the floor to Germany.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of Croatia, Slovakia and Germany. We are deeply concerned about the recent escalation of violence in Gaza and a high number of Palestinians to de-escalate the situation. Considering the dreadful medical and humanitarian situation in Gaza, the entry of both much-needed humanitarian personnel and medical supplies. In that context, we commend the decision to maintain the opening of the Rafah crossing between Gaza and Egypt in both directions throughout the holy month of Ramadan. Compliance with international humanitarian law and international human rights law by states and non-state actors, including accountability, is a cornerstone for peace and security. While recognizing the right to protect its borders, we expect Israel to respect the fundamental right to peacefully protest and the principle of proportionality in the use of force when defending its legitimate security interest. Security forces must refrain from the use of force against unarmed civilians. Lethal use of force must be exercised with maximum restraint and only as a last resort to protect life. Hamas violent and refrain from putting people in danger by encouraging them to approach the security fence. Against this backdrop, we regret that the current text of the resolution does still not reflect adequately the situation on the ground, including the role of non-state actors and the obligation of the de facto authorities in Gaza to protect lives. Therefore, Croatia, Slovakia and Germany have decided to abstain. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you very much. Next on my list is Australia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Australia's position on this resolution is guided by the conviction that investigations into incidents where international law may have been breached must to allegations of chemical weapons use in Syria. That's to establish open to criticism and accusations of bias. The resolution's language prejudges an outcome of the inquiry. The resolution and any inquiry must also acknowledge the role of Hamas in recent events. As it stands, Israel is mentioned throughout, while Hamas is not mentioned at all. Further, the inquiry's geographical mandate apparently covers the entirety of the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and includes parts of Jerusalem, and over an unlimited time period. This resolution overreaches and, in doing so, fails to give the events that have transpired on the Gaza perimeter. I reiterate, investigations into allegations of breaches of law very concerned that this resolution does not achieve this. For these reasons, Australia will vote against this resolution. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you, Excellency. And the next speaker is Hungary.
President, Hungary follows the events in and around Gaza with utmost concern. While Hungary calls for careful consideration and restraint by the Israeli security forces when dealing with the tens of thousands of people approaching the security fence, we fully support Israel's rights for self-defense and to protect its could not grant our support to the resolution. We regret that the drafting process of the resolution was rather one-sided, substantial, disappointing. Proposals of the European Union were and as we have an unbalanced and over-politicized text on the table, failing to adequately address the ability of all key parties should in principle deal with human rights issues, and we should strive to attain a balanced and proportionate approach to maintain and strengthen the Council's credibility. Hungary believes that the tragic situation in Gaza needs to be viewed in its full context. While we agree that Israeli security forces must refrain from the excessive use of force when protecting the security of Israel, there are a number of points that also need to be mentioned. The Palestinian right to peaceful protests is undeniable. However, protesters, where demonstrators are throwing rocks and Molotov cocktails, are not peaceful. Violence on the Israeli side directly put innocent civilians in risk, and young children to approach a heavily protected security fence are murderers. When we try to investigate the responsibility for the loss of innocent lives, we investigate the responsibility of all parties, including the responsibility of non-state actors, especially Hamas, an organization which is viewed as a terrorist group by the EU, an organization which still hasn't renounced violence. Hungary cannot agree to the resolution which tries to hide any of these facts. Thank you very much.
I thank you, sir. And now I pass the floor to the United Kingdom.
Importance of this session. Palestine. More than 100 Palestinians have been killed in the past 6 weeks during protests in Gaza. The Prime Minister said earlier this week this loss of life is tragic and extremely concerning. We have also expressed our concern at the role of Hamas and other extremist groups have played in orchestrating these protests and fomenting violence. Hamas and Islamic Jihad have themselves acknowledged that a substantial number of the deaths were in fact their militants. It's regrettable, therefore, that the substance of today's resolution remains partial and unbalanced. We cannot support an international investigation that refuses explicitly to call for an investigation into the action of non-state actors such as Hamas. An investigation of this kind would not provide us with a comprehensive assessment of accountability. Rather, such an investigation risks hardening positions on both sides and moving away. Resolution today. Abstention should not be misconstrued. The United Kingdom fully supports into the events that have taken place in recent weeks, including the extent to which Israeli security forces' rules of engagement are in line with international law, and the role Hamas played in events. The loss of life, casualties, and the volume of live fire presents a depressingly familiar and unacceptable pattern, and this cannot be ignored. To that end, in addition to abstaining on today's resolution, we call directly on Israel to make clear its intentions and carry out what must be a transparent inquiry into the IDF's conduct at the border fence, and to demonstrate how this will achieve a sufficient level of independence. This investigation should include international members. Findings of such an investigation, and if wrongdoing is found, that those responsible be held to account. It serves as a tragic reminder of the consequences to redouble our efforts to realize a two-state solution which will ensure justice and peace for both Israelis and Palestinians. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. If there are no more speakers at this portion, at the request of the delegation of the United States, the Council will now proceed to a recorded vote on a draft resolution S-28/L1 as orally revised. I now ask the Secretariat to open the voting machine, and I request all delegations to register their vote.
Well, you're watching SABC News, live visuals there out of Geneva in Switzerland, where we were just watching a special sitting or session of the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva. Representatives here, international representatives, are voting today on whether to establish a commission of inquiry into the recent Israeli violence that resulted in the deaths of 100 Palestinians in 6 weeks. We're at that point now where representatives are registering their votes, and we should have a tally for you in the next few minutes.
All right.
29, no, 2, abstention. Draft resolution S-28/L1. Results of the votes will shortly be distributed. We'll now move to explanations of vote and general comments after the vote. Are there any delegations wishing to take the floor? I recognize Mexico.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mexico considers that the Human Rights Council, the United Nations on the promotion and protection of human rights, must promptly examine emergencies such as the current one in Gaza, have the responsibility to cooperate. That concerns at this serious situation accompanied by adequate measures to address them and achieve, and in particular children. One element that we believe is key is ensuring that the mandate of the Commission that we seek to establish does not prejudice the outcome of the investigation and acts in the most balanced, impartial and exhaustive way possible in order that the conclusions are complete and balanced. We thus recognize the additions made during the oral revision of the draft resolution, which add to balancing it, although we would have preferred the inclusion of express references to the authorities that have control over the Gaza Strip itself, as well as by other delegations. The Commission must investigate the actions of all parties, including the groups that induce to and credibility. I voted in favour of the resolution, given that the lives of civilians and their safety and enjoyment of their human rights must be a priority at all times, and also considering the importance of unconditional respect of international humanitarian law and effective accountability. We trust that the work of this Council will help address the needs of the civilian population, and in particular the most vulnerable persons. We reiterate the urgent need for parties to resume direct negotiations without preconditions in order to resolve the substantive problems between Israel and Palestine, including the definitive status of the.
I thank you very much, Excellency. Ladies and gentlemen, before closing our meeting, I would like to remind you that the report of this special session is currently being finalized and will shortly be posted on the Council's that the draft report is adopted at referendum. Delegations will have the opportunity to submit comments through the Secretariat within 2 weeks from the date of circulation of the draft report. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of this special session. I hereby declared closed the 28th special session of the Human Rights Council.
SABC News, we are live from Johannesburg. What you just saw there was a live crossing to a special session of the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva, Switzerland, where a resolution has just been adopted that a commission of inquiry into the recent Israeli violence that left nearly 100 Palestinians dead in 6 weeks will commence.
Right, so in fact the voting pattern, I suppose, predictably there were 29 votes for yes to the resolution, 2 that said no, and that's the USA and Australia, which was not
expected, yes. Yeah.
Which is not a surprise because, you know, they're strong allies of Israel. And abstentions, there were 14 of them. So a lot of them, like the UK, saying, look, we're not going to get in the way of this, but we're not quite happy with the way that the process has been adopted. And they wanted that other non-state actors such as Hamas be included in their responsibility in the violence that took place. So the resolution has been passed, 29 saying yes, 2 saying no, America and Australia, and there were 14 abstentions. And hopefully a little bit later on we'll be talking to Sherwin Brycebees, who's our special correspondent who covers the UN for us.
Well, it was heartening to note that country after country did bemoan what they called this disproportionate and indiscriminate use of force by Israeli troops. South Africa, of course, very much pushing its weight behind a resolution of this nature and evoking the legacy of our late global icon and former President Tata Madiba, and calling for the immediate establishment of this sort of inquiry, also supporting a two-state solution and saying that these findings of a commission like this one could be used for grounds of prosecution at the International Criminal Court.
Yes, indeed. All right.